What's up? Today I want to talk to you about the Macallister 165mm blade corded circular saw. Got it a couple of months back now, a few months back now, and he's done me well. I bought him just because I wanted to rip some sheets of OSB to build some shelving, and the guy in B&Q basically wouldn't do more than 4 cuts on this sheet, so I was like, I don't know why that is, you normally do more. I bought the cheapest circular saw I could find, and that was this bad boy, which is the MSCS1200, which means nothing to me either. But the 1200 does mean that it is a 1200 watt power output, which is pretty standard, I think. It's got a few good features you'll find on most circular saws out there, and this cost me a grand total of £40, and it has done me no wrong since I've got it. From ripping down big long sheets, your 2.4 meters, down to little silly cuts and different bits and pieces, it's really done well. So the main features, it's got the laser on it, which is pretty handy. Gives you some kind of guidance where you're going. It's got the ability to cut a bevel, which is, instead of doing a straight cut, allows you to do a cut at a slant. And it also allows you to adjust the depth of the blade. I should also say that the maximum cutting depth is 55mm, which is pretty decent. You're talking more than a 2x4, so that's not bad at all. The other thing it's got a blade guard, which you can swing back like that. And the thing about this is, and a few things I had to get to grips with when I had been looking at these, although I bought this kind of spontaneously, was the difference between a track saw, a plunge saw, and just your standard circular saw. Now, the main thing about this, it's not a plunge saw because the blade is not exposed and ready to plunge, cut directly down into material. This is starting at the end of your sheet and running into it, and then that automatically pushes back the blade guard as you run into it, so it tries to keep these 10 bad boys in check. So it's been really good for that. The other thing it comes with is this adjustable straight edge guide, and that just slots in to the front like that and then tightens down with a retained screw to whatever width you need. So what you basically do is you get this bad boy in, you line up your mark, and then you make sure that coordinates properly with where you've got this set, and then adjust that back and forth. Now, when I thought I was getting one of these, what I thought was you get a circular saw and then you are cutting straight as an arrow every single time. That is false. You can literally cut a circle with a circular saw. So the first time I used it, I cut and I was like all over the place. So it becomes really important all of a sudden that you've got a straight edge. Now, if you are going to use that, you want to be using the factory edge on any sheet that you are cutting, because you know that is as true as possible. If you're using an edge you've previously cut, it could be a bit wonky or just not 100%. So that's great if you're doing small cuts, but all of a sudden if I need to rip down a sheet, I've got a maximum length I could adjust that to like 200mm, if that. So all of a sudden I started using things like other pieces of wood, long offcuts that I had, and then basically clamping those down and running the edge of the saw against that. So that keeps you straight and narrow. So you end up doing this thing, or using a spirit level as another way, and you end up clamping those down, which ends up being quite tricky when you're working on your workbench. You need to clamp those down, then you need to watch out for the motor which is coming through. So it can be a bit tricky. Now, there is something that I mentioned there previously, which is a track saw. Now that solves all of these problems, and that's not something I have. Macallister might do a version, I can't remember off the top of my head. If they do, I'll drop a link below. But the track saw effectively is a circular saw which is connected to a piece of metal extrusion, and that allows you to fasten that down, and it always runs on that metal extrusion, so that it will only run in a straight line at any given time. So, but that's not what we're talking about here. So here we've got the Macallister 40 pound 165mm blade. That's the diameter of the blade, and that is pretty small, about as small as you'll get. There's another one up which I think is only 10 pounds more, and the blade steps up maybe 10 or 20mm I think diameter, and that just is gonna allow you to increase the cutting depth. So like I say, if you're cutting sheets and things like that, as I said before, the depth of the blade coming out of the saw at the bottom here relative to the surface on which it would sit when you're cutting allows you to cut just under the depth that you need, and that's great so that you can get a more efficient cut and a better quality cut. So adjusting that's really important. You want it only to be coming slightly through the material. Another great thing that you can do as well is cut on top of your workbench. I've not tried this, but I know an awful lot of people do it, is to lay like some foam on a foam board on your workbench and then just cut directly on it, making sure that the blade depth only goes so far and into that foam, and you can just run right across your sheet then, and you're not thinking about balancing it on the edge of a workbench and things like that. Or you can do it directly on the ground. Well, that's a really popular method as well. So like I say, great little saw, great for ripping down boards, great for cutting little pieces as well, like I've been doing for these dog bowl stands I've been making recently, which are available on Etsy. Yeah, it's been really good, a really good way not to rely on having to cut your sheets in store at B&Q if that's where you get your timber from. I know I do sometimes with sheets, purely because they've got that facility, and I've turned up before, grabbed the sheet off the pile and put it on the trolley, walked round to the saw, and it's like out of order, and you're like. The other thing I should mention is that it has a 24 tooth blade, which I think is pretty much on the low end, and I think the general rule is that the higher the tooth count, the better and finer cut you will get. So quite often I think people will buy a saw like this, swap out the blade, and just sort of increase the quality of that component and just be able to make some finer cuts with a slightly cheaper saw. But overall, if you're starting out, I found that this is more than enough to get you going. Cheapest possible option I think you'll get. If you can find a cheaper one, please comment, let me know. But this has done me well. It was a great quick buy, and it's going to keep going for a little while longer. I think I'll keep using it, that's for sure. But if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below, and yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I'll speak to you next time. Cheers.